What are the best 40k armies for beginners? So today we're going to be covering that. Let's get into it. If you haven't subscribed to the video yet, guys, please do go ahead and subscribe. It means a lot to us, and it means that I can carry on making awesome videos like this. So to start off with, we're going to go with the Necrons. So the Necrons are an interesting faction for beginners because as a beginner faction, they actually read as a pretty decent faction. Mainly because, number one, they have one, well, they don't just have one color scheme. They have one color scheme that you can definitely go with the box art, which is super easy to paint. And also the playstyle might suit someone who is a little bit more new to the game. This comes down to a few factors. The first thing is how easy it is to actually play. So there's some really good guns in here, like you've got DDAs, and there's also really nice centerpieces of the army, which is like the Silent King. Now, the great thing about these pieces are their damage is really good and they're really durable. So if you're just starting off with the faction, you're having a durable army that does some damage is obviously fantastic because it gives you a lot of redundancy on the armies that you use. Now, this is fantastic. And also from a painting perspective, this army is super easy to paint. You can just basically dry brush them all metal, give them a spot color, and suddenly they are close to being done. To the point where I reckon you could do an entire army of this in a week if you really put your mind to it. Also, some of the models are awesome. You've got the Catan, which look great. You've got the new Nightbringer. You've got the Void Dragon. You've got the Silent King. Some of the most popular and iconic models in the entire range of GW. So, for all the reasons above, I'm going to put this into S tier for beginner friendly. As a faction for beginners, this is just great, and I would definitely recommend this faction if you're just starting off if you're just starting off with 40k, and this sort of reads with your vibe. Next, we're going to go on to Eldar. Eldar are my babies. I love Eldar. I've played them for, I don't know. It was my third army that I ever started. It's probably in the region of about 14 years that I've been playing Eldar for. Now, I love the army, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do the army, but as a beginner-friendly army, it's not too beginner-friendly. There's a few reasons for this. In terms of the actual painting of this army, it's a little bit more difficult because there's lots of different color schemes that you would want to adhere to if you want to follow the box art. So, for example, with Necrons, you paint metallics, and if you get good at painting metallics, you can paint the entire army. With Eldar, you might have to paint orange, green, red, across all the aspect warriors and orange. All the colours that, if you independently are trying to learn when you're just starting the hobby, it's quite be difficult to get correct. Also, playing the army, it's an army of toughness 3 elves. So in terms of a beginner army, when you're just picking up the faction and just trying to have your general nice little crusade games, it's fine. But if you put a unit in the wrong place at the wrong time, it'll just evaporate to bolster, which is less than optimal. Also, their combat patrol doesn't really help them in terms of, in terms of trying to start them out, because it doesn't give you a nice spread of the stuff that you kind of want. The Dire Rangers are cool, but if you wanted to have like a generalized approach, you'd want some Guardians, you'd want like a Farseer or something like that. Some more of those iconic units that really help Eldar read as what they are. That being said, they do have some really, really lovely models and some of my favorites in the entire range. So you've got the Avatar of Cain, the Young Khan, the tanks look great, the Grav tanks, lots of opportunities for like freehand and some awesome little bits like that. So all of these things you have to remember are also contributing factors to my decision. However, for a beginner-friendly army, this isn't it, I don't think. Well, not that you shouldn't do it, it's just going to be a challenge. So I'm going to put these guys into C tier as pretty challenging for the reasons I've said above. But that being said, they're a fantastic faction. They're really awesome. So I wouldn't say don't do them because I'm not going to say that about any of the factions that I'm going to talk about today. But I think they would be challenging if you want us to start out. Going on to number 3, the Tyranids. Recently I did 1,000 points of Tyranids in 24 hours. And that actually went okay. If you want to go see the video, I will shamelessly tag it, and you should go watch that because it was a really fun challenge. But ultimately, Tyranids as a whole have a very wide variety of models that you can choose from, and some also very lovely looking models. So you've got the Norn Emissary, you've got even the Hive Tyrant is fantastic, the Winged Hive Tyrant. There's some awesome like super heavies that are still in the game currently, like the Harridan and all that sort of thing. And also, the new miniatures and new sculpts like the Raveners and the Leviathan kit, and even the new Tyranid Prime, all look fantastic. And all of which are really good to try and start learning how to paint the Tyranids, because there's lots of texture on these things that you can sort of learn how to paint and, get those things looking really, really good. Also, in terms of playing them, like when you're just starting out, I think this is probably one of the more forgiving aspects of the factions that you're going to be seeing. Mainly because there's a few defensive stat checks and some really good damage in there as well. If you want to, and also you can run this list a variety of different ways because, there's lots of different ways to play them. You can go with loads of gaunts, loads of monsters, but all of them encompassing mean that you can basically run them whichever way you want, and you're going to have fun either way. So for all the reasons I've just said, I'm going to put them into A tier because I think they are a really, really good starting faction. And I know a lot of people who start with Tyranids, especially with the Space Marine game and all that sort of thing. You can see people wanting to play these Tyranids, because they see it on a game that they like, and they're like, yeah, I want to use that. That looks cool. So yeah, put them into A tier, and let's move on to the next one. The Thousand Suns. So I spoke about the Thousand Suns in terms of how difficult they are to paint in another video that I did recently, and I put them into the very bottom of the tiers. Now, this is obviously is going to contribute towards whether they are beginner friendly or not, because I'm trying to look at it from a hobby perspective mainly, and then from a play perspective, are there interactions here that might mean that you quite easily lead to make a mistake, or there's tactics here that are quite difficult to, utilize effectively, and all that sort of thing. And from a paint perspective, as I say, they're not fun to paint if you're just starting out, even if you're not just starting out and you're just trying to paint them. The trim is crazy. There's trim on top of trim. There's trim around circles, and there's a lot of detail to these miniatures. But on the flip side, there's a lot of character to them. So the miniatures are lovely. Magnus is great. Like, he's probably my least favorite of the Chaos Primarchs, but he also is a great mini. And playing them can be challenging because ultimately it's got an entire phase in that army that you wouldn't normally see in any other army. And ultimately that can lead to mistakes being made, can lead to misinterpretations, and can be difficult to manage if you're just starting out. So personally, with all the reasons above, including the painting and like the playing, I'd lead this towards being like the very bottom D tier wouldn't choose if I was a beginner. Now, I'm not saying don't do it. I know that there are people out there who just love the Thousand Suns, who would always play a Thousand Suns, and who always pick the Thousand Suns, and that's totally fine. But I'm going to put them in this tier from my own personal experience. And let's move on to the next one. Custodes, Henry Cavill's favourite faction, and a lot of people's favourite faction, to be fair. These guys are quite popular, and from a beginner perspective, I think these guys are pretty solid. Like, there's a low model count. You're working on metallics. Metallics are easier to start off with than trying to learn how to blend, or try to paint loads of trim. Like, when you've got a majority of colour of being a metallic colour, they can be quite easy to maintain and quite easy to paint. Also, because it's low model count, you can spend a bit more time on these miniatures, which is super fun, because ultimately, if you're painting an army with, like, I don't know, let's say 20 models, you can get that done in a reasonable time and still try and put some decent effort into it with your first army, which I think is a super important aspect if you're trying to, start something off. We want to give yourself the time and not have the pressure to have to paint them in a really speedy manner. So it's a very big positive for the Custodes. Also, they've just had a brand new box and a load of brand new kits. And those kits are lovely. I have built them. I've did a Custodes Dreadnought, and the Custodes Dreadnought was super fun to do as well. But I would say these guys are super beginner friendly. That being said, the playstyle is very elite. It's very easy for you to lose units that you don't really want to lose. And it's quite difficult to manage that, especially as a beginner, where you're like, I'm going to throw everything in the middle, and you lose everything. And now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, especially if you're just memeing and chilling out and doing your own thing, because ultimately you're just starting out, you're just, learning the army. So, but it is a negative in terms of they can be difficult to play. So for that reason, I'm not going to put them into S tier, but I'm going to put them into the A tier. So they are beginner friendly, and I would recommend that you just start off Custodes, especially with the new miniatures. They look fantastic, and I hope you have a lot of fun with them. And that being said, let's move on to the next one. Chaos Knights. Now, Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights are an interesting one when you're just starting out. Now, Chaos Knights are a little bit more difficult in terms of like the hobby side of things, because assembling them can take a while, and also the trim is slightly more challenging than the Imperial Knight variant because it's a little bit more pointy. However, they, as an army for beginners to play, they're super easy to play, just because you pick up 5 big robots and you want to go just move them forward. And we're not going to worry about playing them well here. This is not a competitive channel. We've got a channel for that, so we're going to link that below as well. So if you want to go learn how to play these things better, go check them out. But ultimately, here we want to look at just how to just when you're just starting the hobby. So the assembly is challenging, the painting can be daunting, but ultimately when you actually start painting them and they're assembled, they are relatively reasonable and you're just starting out. You can easily get them to battle ready in no time at all. You're painting metallics, you're painting trim, and you can put some transfers on there if you're getting a bit spicy. And yeah, so I think these guys sit solidly in the middle. I think they're B tier. I think they, with a mix of painting and play and all that sort of thing, I think it's very hard to play them well, but it's easy to pick up and play them, especially when you're just starting. So yeah, we'll put them into B tier, and we're going to move on. Number 7, we're going to go with Drukhari. So Drukhari are a uniquely interesting faction because they're the elves, but they're the dark elves, but in 40k universe. So that's fun. So the Drukhari are a really cool set of miniatures because but you have got some old miniatures too. So in terms of the range, I wouldn't say the range is probably the most up to date, but also they are probably quite easy to paint. Sorry, quite easy to build. The painting side can be a little bit challenging because lots of small details on these, and they are small. They've got lots of little ridges on the armor panels and all that sort of thing. And when you're painting an entire army of this, it can be quite daunting to do. So for me, these guys sit in a similar realm to the Eldar in the fact that assembly is fine. Painting can be a challenge, and the playstyle is also very unforgiving, similar to the Eldar in terms of like trying to play them to a point where they are effective. They do take time to learn, and they do take time to get the pacing right on them. But from a brand new beginner's perspective, winning games isn't your priority. Having fun is your priority. And that being said, I think they are a super fun faction. But I'm still going to put them in the same range as Eldar. So I'm going to put them into pretty challenging because I do think they're hard to pick up and play, or pick up, paint and play. But yeah, so I'm going to put them into C tier, which is pretty challenging, and then we're going to move on. Number 8, Grey Knights. So these miniatures are old as hell. They are old. They are little stumpy dudes. They're cool, but I don't know, one of my favorite factions because I love playing them. But in terms of a beginner picking them up, building and painting is great. Like they are great to pick up and build and paint. They're easy to assemble. They're easy to paint. They're mainly metallics, and there are a few things that you can pick up and try and make your own, like the force weapons, and give a lot of character to these miniatures. Also, because they're such old models, there's a lot of scope here for kit bashing and making your own. Like I made some of my own out of some old like Mark V armor where they've got the little pointy shin pads from the Horus Heresy range, which looked really, really cool for them, and scale them a little bit better. So as a beginner army, I think these guys are fine. I think they're absolutely fine. I don't think they are the easiest, but I don't think they're the easiest to play. But ultimately, the uppy downy, which is a very commonly known term, means that your units go up in the air and come back down in the following turn. I think this is a really, really cool army for that. So for those reasons, as a beginner army, I think this works. So I'm going to put this into A tier for the reasons I've said above. And I think if you want to get into Grey Knights, this is a great army to get started off with. And with that, let's move on. Next, we're going to cover the Tau Empire. So the Tau Empire are super cool. They are mecha robots. They have some cool big dudes with guns, but they are mainly shooty faction. Now they have some crude carnivores, which are in the lore are super cool as well. They owe them a favor because they saved them once, and that gives you some flavor to this army as well. So in terms of a beginner army, I think this one sits beautifully in that range where you can pick up the army, you can play it, you can just roll your data sheet guns. There's a few cool interactions you can do with the army, which you can learn later down the line. But as actually picking up the army and playing, this army is fantastic for doing so. So I think this army with painting as well, there's lots of large, smooth panels, and there's not loads to paint. So when you get your spot colors down, it's very easy to replicate, and there's not loads and loads of detail on these miniatures. So to try and paint them would be relatively reasonable. So if we're looking at it, playing is cool, and your painting is pretty simple as well, and assembly is fine as well. So I think as an army, for this to be picked up, I think this is definitely an S tier army for the beginners, because I know that there's a lot of Tau haters out there, but I'm not one of them. I mean, I can meme sometimes, right? But I think generally speaking, the Tau are a really good army for beginners for all the reasons I've listed above. So I'm going to put them into S tier, and we're going to move on. Number 10, we have the Leagues of Votann. So the Leagues of Votann came out a while ago with a bunch of new minis, a bunch of new rules, a really cool range, and recently they had some more characters put in there, like Beric, and I can't remember the name of the other guy. I'm going to go with Bjorn. I think that's a Space Wolf character. But either way, there's some dudes in there that look really, really cool. There's a guy with like a Tyranid head underneath him. There's a guy that's carrying an Ork. So you can see that they've put a lot of flavor into these miniatures, and they do look fantastic. So however, what I'm going to say is, assembly-wise, I've asked a few people about the land fort and what sort of thing, and I've had some feedback on some other videos, and I think that they can be challenging to assemble. And painting-wise, they're okay. They're not like the worst thing to paint in the world. Lots of big surfaces, lots of ways that you can introduce your own flavor to the army. However, they're not the easiest to paint, and they're not the easiest to assemble. And that's changed my mind originally, because originally I put them into a pretty easy tier in terms of painting in the video that I said. But I've changed my mind on that from what a few people have said. But playing wise, they're fantastic to pick up. Like, they've got a few cool detachments. There's a really cool way to, there's lots of cool ways to play them. There's lots of different ways to play them, especially at the beginning. You don't worry about being competitive in that. If you're not worried about being competitive, you can just pick up any of the detachments and you're going to have a fun time. So I think for the reasons I've said above, Leagues of Votann are going to solidly sit into, so because of the reasons I've said, I think they're going to sit into B tier, which is, there's better. I think there's easier to pick up, but I don't think they're the worst. So yeah, we're going to put them into B tier and we're going to move on. The Chaos Space Marines. These guys are super cool. They're one of my favorite personal favorite factions. I know I have a lot of favorite factions. I love a lot of factions. But these guys look fantastic. They have a really cool like set of lore behind them as well, and there's a lot to get into here. So number one, they have 1,000 detachments. You can play them whichever way you want, with any of the minis that you want, and you're going to have some fun. And they're still an efficient army with, you know, cool little interactions. And painting them can be a challenge because there's lots of trim, and it's not a beginner-friendly painting army for sure. Because there's demonic flesh, trim, armor panels. You've got tanks in there that you might want to take, which also have 1,000 bits of trim. If you for some reason wanted to have a couple of Helldrakes in there, they're really hard to paint just because there's loads and loads of trim. And for those reasons, they don't sit in a very beginner-friendly category. However, I don't think they're the worst. So I'm going to put these into C tier, which are pretty challenging, but on the proviso that they have some of my favorite minis in the entire range. Lord Discordant is fantastic. Abaddon's awesome. And I would definitely recommend going to have a look at them if you wanted to give them a go. So yeah, pretty challenging. I'm going to go into the next one. Now we're going to go on to World Eaters. The Khorne counterpart, I suppose we're going to say. Now, the World Eaters are probably one of my favorite beginner factions, but not for any good reasons. Like, if you're someone who just loves running your army at the opponent, getting in there, beating people up, swinging your chain axes, and having a good time, these guys are fantastic for you. Now, the only thing is they are quite linear, so there's not loads of ways to play this in, when you're just starting off. It's very much combat, go. There's more nuance when you get later down the line with that, but from a beginner's playing perspective, they are quite simple. Also, the model range. The model range is fantastic. The new Khorne Berserker kit is awesome. Angron looks amazing. The 8-bound look great as well. It's a very, small, it's quite a small range, really, but they've got a lot of character in there for what they've got. The only thing that holds these guys back is the painting. So there's still trim. There's a lot of trim here, and it can be daunting, it can be awful, and it can make you not want to paint much after a while. Now, I'm not going to mark this down too much because of this, though, because ultimately there is less trim than most. If you take the 8-bound and you take some Chaos Spawn and all that sort of thing in between, you can end up using an arm with you're not painting trim the entire time. Not every mini has trim, but they are quite challenging to paint. But from a beginner's perspective, overall, I'm going to say that these guys sit into the B tier. There's easier, but they're a fantastic started army, and I would never, dissuade someone against it. So they're going to sit into B tier. We're going to move on to the next one. Admech. So Admech, I have a love-hate relationship with Admech. Mostly I love them, but they hate me. So effectively, Admech have an awesome range. They've got some really, really cool miniatures. They've also got some new cool miniatures come out as well recently with the new Lass, who is a tech priest and that sort of thing. However, they are not beginner friendly. They're expensive. Number one, they're a very expensive army. They aren't very forgiving in terms of detail. There's lots of detail in there. In terms of playing them as well, there's lots of ways to play them, but they are also all quite difficult to play. Like, you need to get your pacing correct and all that sort of thing. Like, not just competitively, just generally. Just so you don't feel like you're not doing much. And you can take lots of guns and have fun that way. However, I do feel like that this army requires a level of attention that is quite difficult for a beginner to, give. And if I started out with Admech, I'd have done them for 2 weeks and gone absolutely not and gone to something else. But that's just my personal view. Now, for all the reasons above, from them being expensive, difficult to paint, and difficult to play, they are going to sit right at the bottom with D tier. Wouldn't choose for a beginning army. Just because, as I say, they're not the easiest army to pick up. So I'm going to put them into D tier, and then move on to the next one. Agents of the Imperium. So Agents of the Imperium are, I think they're really fun in the fact that there's lots of assassins you can paint. You've got Grey Knights mixed in there. You've got Death Watch mixed in there as well. And overall, I think they are a cool faction in terms of lore as well. Like the Inquisition have a lot of deep lore there. Like Titus was a Death Watch guy for a while as well, if you've played the Space Marine games. And there is a lot of cool deep lore on, like, say, for instance, the Eversor Assassin is just an assassin they throw behind enemy lines just to mess people up. Just go there. And the Callous Assassin has come from the lore quite a lot. I believe it's a Callous Assassin that assassinated one of the Primarchs. Spoilers, I suppose, even though it's been out for years. And yeah, I think there's a lot of cool aspects here that if you wanted to get into and really get into, you really could. In terms of painting them as well, I don't think they're the worst thing to paint in the world. There's a lot of characters here if you wanted to run them in a more traditional assassin-y route. So I think that it can be challenging that way, but also it doesn't mean that they're like impossible to approach. It just means that you just have a slightly different approach to it. So like you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to paint a character this week. I'm going to paint this week. And if you just pace it out and you give yourself a lot of breathing room around this army, I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. So because of that reason, I'm going to put them into B tier. They're going to sit in the middle. I don't think they are particularly awful. I don't think they're particularly easy. I think they just sit nice in the middle. And also their playing them wise is very difficult. So even though I like from where they are in terms of like the painting side and the assembly side and the hobby side, I think when you're playing them, even when you're just starting out and you're just trying to get a couple of Crusade games or something like that, you might find that you evaporate really quickly if you just have a lot of characters. But as long as you're having fun with it, who cares, right? Next is the Genestealer Cults. The Genestealer Cults, I have personally painted 3 Genestealer Cult armies. One of about 3,000 points, one of about 4,000 points, and one of about 2,000 points. Now, they are not fun to paint. Straight up. They're just not. Like, I just don't think I mean, I had fun assembling them because there's lots of conversions you can do. And the trucks are really fun to do the hazard stripes on. However, they lose their charm really quickly when they are exceptionally expensive. They are really, there's so much detail on them. There's just so much detail. Like neophytes have like 2 grenades and trim on their boots. Why the hell they do, I don't know, but they do. And it's also like a lot of different techniques that you want to learn to paint this army. So you're going to have painting flesh, painting metallics, painting cloth, which I know sounds like most armies, but when you're doing it on the scale that you are, in terms of the little lamps and stuff as well, which we might want to do some OSL on and all that sort of thing, in terms of painting them, there's a lot of detail here, and they can be very challenging. Playing them is fine. Playing them it's fun, depending on, but there's a lot of ways to play them. So I think from beginner's perspective, you can find a sort of like way in one of these detachments that makes you feel really happy about playing them and have some fun. From a completely beginner's perspective anyway, because you might like all of the neophytes. So you might want to go some like uppy downy shooty thing. You might like the combat and go with some, combat sort of way. I mean, I can't remember the name of the detachment. It was quite popular for a while, but that detachment is also very good for it as well. So I think there's a lot of ways to play this army. And the painting side and the price just really lets it down, like to the point where I wouldn't recommend it. So it's going to sit into D tier, wouldn't recommend for a beginner. And then we're going to move on to the next one. 16, Space Marines. I am lumping all the Space Marines into one category on these tier lists, guys, because in terms of approaching hobby for the first time, I do feel like they're all very similar. In terms of hobby, they all have different color schemes, but they all have a relatively same approach. Some Space Marine models have a lot more detail, but then other models don't have much at all. So I think it all balances out in the end. But Space Marines are the beginner faction, right? They were in Assault. They've been in every starter box. They were in Assault and Black Reach. They were in Indomitus. They were obviously in Armageddon. There's probably a box in between that I'm missing out. If you know what it is, drop it in the comments below. I can't remember all the starter boxes. I believe I missed 7th and 8th edition. But yeah, I think Space Marines are a super... Also, Space Marines are super cool. I really like Space Marines. Black Templars are my personal flavor. But in terms of like the Space Marine game as well, beginner friendly, you already have context of the lore if you've played the games. You also have context of the lore because, the Horus Heresy exists, and there's so much lore you can get into, so many books you can read, like the Fall of Sanguinius, and it's also that the books are so well written that you can have a lot of fun with this. I don't read them. I listen to audiobooks because I don't like reading, but they're a great beginner faction. So for those reasons above, and also playing wise, you can play them 1,000 different ways and have fun. So these guys are going to sit nice and solidly into S tier. Easy as hell. They are fantastic to pick up. If I saw someone starting Space Marines tomorrow, I'd be like, fair. That's a great decision. So, Space Marines in S tier. Who knew? I'll move on to the next one. Next, we're going to go on to Imperial Knights, the Chaos Knights good guy counterpart. So, these guys are in a very similar boat to the CK, because I think they have similar pros and cons. Like, pros, painting them can be quite simple if you're going for just battle ready. Cons, assembly's a nightmare. And also, playing-wise, is fun to just walk around with some big stompy robots. However, cons, you can just lose them all in a couple of turns, and it feels really bad. And you don't want to have that happen as a beginner. You want to have fun with the faction, and you want to have a lot of, you know, a lot of fun interactive games with your opponent. Also, the model range isn't super vast in a similar way to the CK. Obviously, there's lots of ways you can do conversions here, and like you can do some banners. Also, the new Destria model's pretty cool. But overall, I would say that this probably sits quite bang in the middle. So for the reasons above, I'm going to put them into B tier. I think they're fine, but there's a lot easier out there. And as a beginner, I think they're completely fine to pick up. So yeah. And with them in B tier, let's move on to the next one. So next we go on to the Orks. So the Orks are, I think they're less beginner friendly than people give them credit for. In terms of playstyle, in terms of approach to the game, in terms of the way beginners get into the hobby, Orks are a super good faction to get into for a few reasons. Now, they are super fun. There's a lot of fluff behind them, a lot of cool lore. Like there's a classic made-up lore, which people say it is, where, like, you know, if an orc believes that a guardsman is an orc, he turns into an orc and all that sort of thing. Or, you know, all the orcs were in space, in a spaceship, in the vacuum of space, were completely fine and could breathe, even without windows, because they thought there were windows and they thought they were fine. Until another orc vessel walks past and tells them, there's no windows. And then they all died and suffocated. Like, obviously, some of this lore is just very fan-driven and all that sort of thing. But there's a lot of cool lore here. So in terms of, like, for fun, I think Orks are a great faction to get into. But painting, they are quite difficult. Now, I've had people disagree with me here. I've had people agree with me. It's various down to your own personal experiences. However, there's a lot of detail on these models. And also, model counts can be quite intimidating depending on the models that you've got to do. So can you try and paint them to a standard that you might have? And also, there's a lot of ways to do contrast, contrast, that sort of thing. You're still going to have to paint those details. Now, you can do the approach where you remove the details with a scalpel, and, you know, and that's totally okay. If that's the way you want to do things, you can totally do that. But they're still not an easy beginner faction. And I think I'm going to stand by that. But I don't think they're the worst, because ultimately the models are really fun and there's a lot of ways to play them. And there's a lot of like lore-driven ways to play them as well. Like the Cult of Speed. You've got the Cult of Speed, you've got the more Drukhari one, which could totally be Bad Moons. And there's lots of ways you can sort of like angle these detachments in a way that you can have a lot of fun with them. But for the reasons above, I'm going to put them into B tier. There's better for beginners, but I think they're a totally fine pick if you're a beginner. And next, we're going to go on to the Emperor's Children, my personal favourite model range that has come out recently. In fact, probably ever. They are awesome. The Fulgrim model is beautiful. The flawless blades are awesome. The infractors look great. There's so much flavour to these models. You've got like injection pumps everywhere. You've got really cool power weapons. You've got the new Lucius model. Oh, what a great range. That being said, they are not very beginner friendly, just because there's a lot of detail to all of these models, and like deceptively so. Like the Noise Marines have injector pump stimulators somewhere. They have like actual speakers. They have the actual trim everywhere as well. The trim is slightly less oppressive than the Thousand Suns, but they are challenging, I would say, because also they are still Space Marines and they're quite brittle. So I think, especially, I'm not really sure how they're doing in 11th edition, but I know that the back end of 10th, they're relying on Defilers to have a lot of fun, and Emperor's Children Defilers are also really cool as well, because I think the Defiler models are awesome, so if you wanted to go buy those, you totally could. But in terms of a beginner army, from the painting side, you'll have a lot of fun. The assembly side, the painting side, you'll have a lot of fun, but there's a lot of detail, so it's not easy. It's not beginner friendly, I should say, but you'll have a lot of fun. So, for those reasons, I am going to put these into pretty challenging, just from the hobby aspect alone. Like, I just don't think this is a very easy faction to pick up and play, or pick up and paint. So, we're going to put those into C tier, which is pretty challenging, and then we're going to move on. Next, we are going on to the Adeptus Sororitas Sisters View Old Guard. So, these guys are super challenging. I have painted the Sisters Army. I had a lot of fun while painting the Sisters Army. The amount of detail on these guys, like, it's deceptive. Like, you've got cherubs books, trim, bolter casings, like robes on every sister, like flesh faces if you want the flesh faces, painting hair. Like, there's so many like details on these miniatures that you can get wrong, or not even necessarily wrong, but it can be challenging to get to a point where you might be happy with them. And also, it's a really expensive army. Like, it's not a cheap army to get into, just because it's a classic issue of units that don't cost a lot that are vaguely efficient. It means you have to buy a lot of them. Like, any army with more models costs more, generally speaking, unless there's like a few odd examples, which I can't think of right now, but I'm sure there is one or two. But in playing wise, you're using miracle dice. Miracle dice are a completely independent rule to sisters. These are really good. They can be really powerful, but they're also quite complicated to use in the correct time, and especially in terms of ordering like dice rolling and all that sort of thing in the new edition, it can get quite confusing. So from a beginner's point of view, this can be challenging to get around. Not impossible, but challenging. But from the hobby side alone, I'm going to put these guys into DT I wouldn't choose, just because they are super challenging. And again, this doesn't mean don't do them. But I want to give this preface again. I say this like a few times throughout the video, guys. These are my opinions on what, armies are good for beginners. Now, just because I don't think sisters are a good army for a beginner, there are going to be beginners that go out and do them, and they're going to have a lot of fun with them, and they're going to think I am wrong. So if you think I am wrong, feel free to go out and have fun with those sisters. But I feel like, there's better armies. So for those reasons, I'm going to put them into D tier, wouldn't choose. And then I think we're going to move on. Next, we go on to the Death Guard, Nurgle's favourite boys, and the defenders of the Plague Gardens. So these guys are a chaos faction with a lot of trim and a lot of detail. So I think their miniatures are fantastic. I think if you like Nurgle and you like that vibe, these guys are going to resonate really heavily with you. And that's a great feeling. But yeah, these guys are super cool, and Mortarion is one of the best Primarch models, if not the best Primarch model. And yeah, I the only thing is a lot of detail to them, and playing wise, they are super slow. So there's a couple ways you can look at that. It's either they're really easy to play because they're slow and they just move where they go, and that's it, or you find it quite challenging to interact with things that you really want to, which is what you want to do in a game, right? I like fast armies. Some people I don't like slow armies, but I think generally speaking, if you like that sort of play style, this is going to suit you. But they're super durable. They're super they can stand on objectives, take a beating, carry on something on that objective and hold them, which is super fun. So for a beginner, I think these guys aren't the worst, but from hobby-wise, I'm going to mark them down a little bit. But from playing-wise is going to be subjective to how you like to play. However, these guys are going to sit solidly into C tier, which is pretty challenging for the reasons I've said above. But Death Guard are super awesome, and Mortarion, quick shout out to you. You are great. Next, we go on to the Astra Militarum, or the Imperial Guard for you old guard out there. So these guys, there's a lot of models here. If you want to run them in any semblance of lots of infantry sort of way, or if you wanted to run lots of tanks, you could do that too. But that's challenging this in a different way, in that painting lots of tanks can be intimidating, and you can do them nice, quick, and easily, but depending on how you approach the hobby, you might find it quite challenging to get them the way you want them to look. And also, there's a ton of details on these miniatures, like the Krieg models, ton of details, especially for a guardsman, compared to like the old, 2D, like Cadian dudes. But yeah, and also play-wise, the order system is super complicated. Like, well, it's not when you know it, but when you're just starting out, it can be quite difficult to try and get your head around. That's why people have loads of tokens to sort of mark out what they do, right? But the Imperial Guard play in a way that they bog objectives down and they kill things with guns, which is super fun. So I'm going to put these into C tier, which is pretty challenging for the reasons I've said above. I think Imperial Guard, though, as a separate point, are probably one of the funnest armies I've used in a while, because I used them. I used the Recon Guard a while ago, and that was super fun. It's just so many dudes running around, just dying for the Emperor. I got to the point where people would die on objectives and be like, for the Emperor, it's fine, it's all good. And you lose 20 mans to a unit of 10 boys, and you're like, this is okay. We have 20 more. The next wave. So yeah, But yeah, if you choose these guys, have fun with them, but I still think they are pretty challenging. So let's move on to the next one. Next, we are going to cover Chaos Demons. These guys have been in a bit of a weird spot. They haven't had a codex throughout 10th. They've had an index and then 4 detachments released for them, which is related to each of the Chaos Gods, which is also fine. But as an army, I think to paint, I think they're lovely minis to paint, to be honest. There's not loads of details. Like, they keep a secret. You paint a Slanesh army in a week. It's flesh and cloth and some details, and that's it, which is great. And there's not a ton of details on these miniatures, so I think to try and paint a Slanesh army really well wouldn't take too much, and it mean that you could just like learn a few techniques as a beginner and really hone in those techniques and have a lot of fun doing so. That being said, can be unforgiving to play, but on the flip side, there's a lot of ways to play them, so I think that's great as well. But I wouldn't say they're going to be beginner friendly here, because I do think that there is a nuance to playing demons that, you know, it takes quite not even necessarily to play well, just to have fun with. Like, I think you need to understand a few things about the faction and have a few games with them to sort of understand that, which is the same with a lot of factions, right? But I think the demons are independently challenging for a couple of reasons. However, because of the hobby side, because that's a big side, that's the main side here, to be honest, for being beginner friendly, I think they are going to sit into B tier. So I don't think that they're the worst faction to paint in the world by any stretch of imagination. I would personally love to paint an army of these. I painted like 5 Lords of Change, or 4 Lords of Changes, and, well, 3 Lords of Changes, Kairos, Bellicor, a couple of Demon Princes and all that sort of thing a while ago for my teammate Alex Fowler, and he has those now. And they were super fun to paint. So I don't think that you'd be going wrong in going for demons. I think they're a super cool army to go for. But yeah, they are super fun. And with that concludes our tier list for beginner-friendly armies. So if you guys like this content and you want to see more of it, please do drop us a like and subscribe. I know I say this a lot, but I really like those subscribes. If you disagree with anything I've said, do drop a comment below. There might be things that you think I'm completely wrong about, which I do want to hear, because I do take it on board. Like, I changed my view on the Votann, because I said that Votann were like easy as hell to paint, and then people have disagreed with me and mentioned why and showed me some of the kits from the land forts, and I actually did change my mind too. So yeah, drop the comments below. That'd be awesome to see. We also have a new mic set up, so hopefully that sounds better than the last 2 videos. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what happened there. It was even worse than my inbuilt mic from my Mac, so I don't know how that happened, but hey. But yeah, guys, until the next one, there's another video on Thursday, so keep an eye out for. There's another video on Friday, so keep an eye out for that. And yeah, so until the next one, guys, much love. Bye-bye.